The Lizardmen. Tough and reliable Saurus warriors with fast skirmishers, flyers, and plenty of massive dinosaurs to assist. In this video I'll show you every unit from the roster before and after research, redline skills and XP. I'll also show you the lords and heroes and their abilities in campaign. So your army has the advantages of having good infantry, good skirmishers, good cavalry and flyers, good monstrous infantry, and a great and vast array of single entities, some of the best in the game. They do have some disadvantages, namely they do lack some typical artillery, and they lack range overall, but nevertheless a powerful army roster in all accounts. So the first army ability that I want to talk about, not army ability, but just specific abilities of the armies, it's the Primal Instance. This is a passive ability when hit points are less than 50%. They will gain 50% charge bonus, plus 10 melee attack, and plus 5 physical resistance for an indefinite duration. As long as the hit points are less than 50%, you got this. This further enhances their combat capabilities into the ends of the battles. The second army ability, that would be the Predatory Senses. So some units will have these senses, and it allows you to find units in hiding with a much better range. So therefore, let's say the enemy has some units hiding in the forest, it won't do them any good against the Lizardmen, because it's one of the armies that have the best senses to detect those, and difficult to conceal enemy units in battle against. And the third ability, well, not really an ability, a deficiency. It's Rampage. When a unit with this ability, such as Rexy here, suffers damage, it may cause it to attack the closest enemy and just ignore your orders. So you have to be on the lookout for any abilities allowing you to counter this. Some chiefs, for instance, have it, some lords have it. So this can put really your units in danger, so be mindful of this. All hail the Hypnotoad! So Lord Mazdamundi, wonderful spellcaster lord, is what you typically expect in melee actually. Without armor, melee attack or melee defense really. He does have magical attacks for whatever purpose. Not a lot of weapon strength either, so keep him away from combat, at least until he gets a mount, of course. He has a mixed spellbook, which is rather interesting because it includes light, it includes the lore of heavens, and it includes the lore of high magic, so several good spells, plus some of his other abilities, which I'll show you in a moment, that are his main strength. Overall, very powerful spellcaster lord for your armies. In campaign, Lord Mazdamundi does have the abilities of Cold-Blooded, giving 16 leadership and stopping rampage. He also has Focus of Mysteries, which gives them the bounce spell with 2 charges of this nice Banishment Vortex spell, very good versus armor. He also gets a Wind spell, which is the Ruination of Cities. This is a very interesting spell. It will provide 3 damaging rifts that spread outwards. These are random, so be careful, put them in the middle of a nice blob. That's how typically people use that. Then he also can get Regeneration as a passive ability, which is always nice for any lord. Helps him survive longer, of course. Finally, in terms of his quest items, he does gain this passive ability with a Sunburst standard of Exotool, fatting allies in range in 35 meters, melee defense and missile resistance. Always nice. Krokkar, a very nice melee fighter. Krokkar has good armor, no shield though, great melee attack, actually very average defense, but that's good. More importantly, he has good armor piercing damage with the bonuses versus large, so he's very good at doing damage to those enemy lords on mounts, enemy single entities, etc. Do not forget his great charge bonus, so make sure that you take advantage to charge him in for more effectiveness. In abilities in campaign, Krokkar can get Cold-Blooded, giving 16 leadership and stopping rampage. We're already talking about it. He can also get the Sacred Spawning of Shuttle, physical resistance and more vigor per second, which is always nice. He also gets the Swiftness of Itzel. This is an active ability, an explosion, that also gives him a speed buff. Very useful to run away from difficult targets. And then, in terms of the quests, he also can get the Bound spell, 2 charges of Magic Missile, the Hand of Gods, causing major magical and fire damage, and of course very good against armor with that armor piercing. A nice mixed melee and caster lord, Tehen Hawin, bless you, has good armor, great melee attack, actually with poison attacks, average melee defense, great weapon strength with armor piercing as well, and a decent charge bonus. Do note all of these highlights is because he also has the frenzy ability. Then he has the lore of beasts, good for many circumstances, with some summons, with some damage dealing spells, with some buffs. So he does have quite a nice feel for a hybrid lord overall. In campaign, he can get Focus Instants, which stops rampage in an area. He also has Frenzy, which is I already spoke about, and immune to contact effects, which is always nice. He ignores any effects of enemy contacts like poison, etc. And Blade of the Serpent's Tongue. This imbues his attacks with poison, his and allies in range, of course, and gives a nice 10% charge bonus. Now, for his quests, he can also get the Plague of Sotek, giving a 20% ward save and plus 12 leadership whenever he is casting. A rather unique lord, Tic-Tac-Toe, is always flying with low armor, great speed of course because it's a flyer, good melee attack and melee defense values. The weapon strength is majorly armor piercing. Since he's a flyer, charge bonus is also very good. Now it should be noted that he has a 20% physical resistance as well, and Vanguard deployment, excellent for some tactical play. So Tic-Tac-Toe can get Focus Instinct, stopping rampage in an area, which is always nice. You also had the Drop Sphere of Tepok, which is a bombardment ability. Very good damage for a small area, really. He can also get the Master of the Skies, which is an augment giving him speed and melee defense, which is very good melee defense, actually. And in addition to this, he can get the Mask of Heavens. This is an augment in an area affecting allies that are flying, and that gives them more armor and melee defense. Gorok, he's a massive tank. He excels in single combat. Good armor, a silver shield so he can block some of those missiles, good melee attack but much better melee defense values. He still has a nice weapon strength, which is mainly armor piercing, which is excellent, so he does cause damage, and quite a nice charge bonus to boot. In advantage to that, he also has a 15% physical resistance, and he also has an expert charge defense. So whenever bracing, he actually negates the enemy's charge bonus. So of course you can charge him in, but sometimes you want to just enjoy the benefits of denying the enemy charge. Overall, he can go against anyone and survive for a really long time, which is precisely his main strength. So in campaign, Gorok can get Cold-Blooded, leadership and stops rampage, we've already seen that. Rock of Itza, giving him tons of physical resistance and vigor per second when in melee. He also has the To the Death ability, giving him melee attack and leadership if the hit points are below 50%. And then it has an upgrade, the Merely a Flesh Wound, giving even more melee attack and leadership, and the Unbreakable, which is always excellent. Then, as if he wasn't tanky enough, he can get Regeneration as well, so he's kind of like the ultimate survivor already. In his quests, he has two abilities that he can gain: Mace of Ulomak, good weapon damage and tons of melee attack, which is always excellent. And he can also get the Shield of Aeons, which increases armor by 60 and gives expert charge defense to all allies in range. Nakai the Wanderer. Tons of armor and hit points. That's something sometimes overlooked. Great melee attack actually, and decent melee defense, great weapon strength, which is also mainly armor piercing, and still some nice charge bonus. So Nakai is very good in single combat. It should be noted that he's already a very large entity, so be wary of any anti-large enemies. Nakai can get in campaign Cold-Blooded, of course, leadership, stops rampage, always useful. Primal Roar, it's an increase in area, melee attack, physical resistance, but also gives them rampage. He also can get the Miasma of Despair, which is a hex in an area, giving enemies reduced leadership, speed, and vigor. This upgrades to the Aura of Inertia, which basically increases the duration. Now, quests. He can also get, through the quests, the Golden Tributes, which is a passive ability increasing allies in range ward save 10% and giving them perfect vigor. Your favorite chameleon Oxyotl. He's a really nice sniper lord, not too great in melee, with poor hit points, poor armor, good melee attack with poison damage, of course, decent melee defense, and good weapon strength, although not a lot of armor piercing damage there. His main idea is, of course, his missile attack, having average range, magical ammunition, and a powerful armor piercing missile that also causes poison. So he also has everything that he should wish for. He has Vanguard deployment, he has Strider, he has Fire whilst moving, he has Stalk, all the tools that you need to do a lot of damage without being seen. He's a really great sniper lord, just be careful if he gets in close combat. Oxyotl in campaign can get Cold-Blooded, Leadership, stops Rampage, that's nice. A Master Predator, which gives him range, reduces speed and shot speed, and makes him unspottable and gives him Snipe, so he can still fire, cooldown 1 second. He can also get Slippery, which of course gives speed and melee defense, that's typical. And he also gets the Swiftness of Itzel. This is an explosion ability that does not affect friendlies and allows him to escape melee and gives him a nice speed bonus as well. Then in terms of quests, he can also get the best item in the game, the Golden Blowpipe of Ptui. Magic missiles with poison and good armor piercing damage. The Red-Crested Skink Chief is a nice melee lord, average, let's say. He has average armor, good speed, which is always important, great melee attack with poison attacks and melee defense. The weapon strength is slightly average, but he does have armor piercing and a bonus versus large, so that counts for it. Overall, he's great at taking on enemy lords on mounts, enemy heroes on mounts, being very efficient against them, and he can still flee if things do not go his way. Do not forget he also has Frenzy, giving him the increased stats that you see above, and of course, importantly, the immune to psychology. In campaign, the Red-Crested Skink Chief can get the Focus Instincts, which stops Rampage to all allies in an area, very good. He can also get the Warrior's Crest, which is a melee attack and melee defense, great values actually for him, very good. The Saros Old Blood, a powerful melee lord with good armor, a bronze shield, so he can deflect some of the missiles against him. Good melee attack and melee defense value, so basically he can go both in terms of a tank and in terms of a damage dealer, really. Powerful armor piercing weapon strength with good charge bonus as well to boot. So charging him into nearly anything. He'll do a good job. Just be careful against really powerful lords or anything that is very good against single entities. So in campaign, Saros Old Blood only can get the Cold-Blooded ability, so Leadership, stops Rampage, it's still always useful. The Kroxigor Ancient, another lord, another melee lord, they have a lot of them. This one has good hit points, so tons of armor, although lacking a shield, good melee attack, but actually weak melee defense, so he's much better on the offense. And the nice armor-piercing weapon strength, this time with the bonuses versus infantry. So he's great to follow your front line, finish off the enemy infantry, but he can do well versus other lords or heroes, especially if they are a small entity. Now, do note that he himself is considered a large target, so be aware of it. Don't engage anything that is good versus large, which may be a problem for him. So the Kroxigor Ancient in campaign can get the Cold-Blooded as others, also monster strength, increasing weapon damage, and the nice bonuses versus infantry. We also can get the Endurance Aura here, melee defense and missile resistance for allies in range, and also the Miasma of Despair. This is the opposite, an hex in an aura giving enemies less leadership, speed, and vigor. The upgrade, Aura of Inertia here, only upgrades the duration, 24 seconds. The Slan Mage Priestess. So you have a powerful spellcaster lord with them, with either Fire, Heaven's High, Life, or Light lords. Not a lot in terms of stats, even though they do have a lot of hit points there. Do note that they are a large entity, so be careful against those anti-large enemies. Make sure they're not engaged in combat. Keep them safe, casting, which is their main purpose. Your Skink Chief is a nice missile hero with low melee stats, of course, with poor armor, weapon strength, not a lot of it. He's of course intended to use more for his ranged ability. Now, he does have rather reduced range with only 100, but he's fast, and he has poison missile damage as well, which helps to act really as a skirmisher. He can fire whilst moving, which is essential for precisely that tactic. Skink Chiefs in campaign can get Cold-Blooded, which of course you already know. Leadership stops rampage, very useful. This is the tic-tac-toe one, so of course it drops rocks as well, but not all can get that. And we also have Slippery, which gives speed and melee defense. The Saurus Scar Veteran is a nice all-purpose melee hero, really. He has good armor, he has a bronze shield, so he can survive on his own. He has decent melee attack and great melee defense there, which is great. And then we have armor-piercing weapon damage and a bonuses versus large. So overall, he's an awesome hero to have to engage those enemy heroes or lords and to assist your own lord in battle. In campaign, Saurus Scar veterans do get the Cold-Blooded ability as well, which is always excellent. More leadership and stops rampage to unit. That's the main idea here. Always ensure that you stop that rampage, otherwise your units may be in trouble. For your basic spellcaster hero, you have the Skink Priest, available in the Lore of Beasts or Lore of Heavens. You should not engage with him with any prolonged combat. As you can see for those stats, very poor armor, melee attack, melee defense, weapon strength, everything really. So just ensure that he's covered and protected so that he can continue casting his spells. Your Skink Priests can also get, of course, Cold-Blooded, we already talked about it, leadership, stopping rampage to unit, very useful, and he can also get the Arcane Vassal. This is a bound spell of Fireball, 4 charges, very good magic missile, very useful in many circumstances, especially with all that range damage. A powerful melee and caster combination, the Skink Oracle immediately has the Troglodyte mount. Great armor, decent fighting stats, with poison attacks, armor-piercing damage, and then an armor-piercing missile damage as well, with the bonuses versus large there. So only issue with the stats is relatively the low range. Adding to this, he has an amazing set of good spells, which includes damage spells, which includes healing spells, buffs. It gives him a lot of versatility on the battlefield. In campaign, the Skink Oracles can get, of course, Cold-Blooded, same as the others. He can also get Telepathic Connection, which gives them a 1 charge of the Comet of Cassandora, which is a nice bombardment spell, huge damage. He can also get the Primeval Roar, which is a nice melee attack buff to allies in range, also recharges when he is engaged in melee, note that. And you also can get the Swiftness of Itzo, which is a nice explosion that allows him to escape melee, giving him also more speed. Lord Croak, one of the finest spellcasters in the game. He has a lot of hit points, but extremely poor fighting skills. He's unbreakable, that's the good thing. It definitely helps ensuring that he continues to cast spells no matter what. In campaign, Lord Croak can get the Cold-Blooded, of course. Leadership, stops rampage, is always important to have those. Supreme Shield of the old ones, this is an area, 40% ward save, which is excellent. Then he has 3 deliverances. Deliverance of It's a 1, 2, and 3. These are explosion effects that do not affect friendly troops. 3 spells that actually increase in potency, so you always have the 1, 2, and 3 as long as of course you have selected them. Then you have the Golden Death Mask, which is basically affects enemies in range with less melee attack, and he can also get the Transcendent Healing, which is a regeneration to keep him alive for longer. Skink Cohorts, they are your first infantry, basically a meat shield. They do have the models for that, they're very cool. They still have, decent armor, let's say, for that value, and a bronze shield, which is excellent. Not a lot in terms of combat stats, really. Melee attack, melee defense, poor. Weapon strength, it's relatively average for that. Late game, of course, you could still use a couple of these guys, especially if you're bringing a red-crested Skink Chief. That's the purple edition that they can give. So overall, they do get much better values, but still nothing that, they're still a meat shield. That's the main purpose of them. They'll just be much better at that, and you can still recruit a couple of them in a hurry. Next we have the Red-Crested Skinks. These are a damage dealer unit. They do have that armor piercing, which is excellent, so you can bring them, especially as an early armor piercing unit. They cause poison, so it's excellent to reduce the enemy damage as well. Not a lot in terms of armor, good melee attack, poor melee defense, so they're much better in offense. They do have that frenzy. They also have the immunity to contact effects, which is great. Now in the late game, you can still field a couple of these units, especially under a Red-Crested Skink Chief, which is the numbers in purple. the addition of the enormous purple. So definitely they are a surprising unit that you can use throughout the game, really, just as a great glass cannon, really. Now for a Regiment of Renown, the Cohort of Sotek. These are still the Red Crescent Kings, but with better stats, still armor piercing. Main advantage of these guys is that they are actually unbreakable, and they do have this ability, Refuse to Die. Entities cannot die while the ability is active, so if you can pop this up really well, they'll just keep doing a lot of damage. These are definitely a late game unit for sure, if you can learn how to use this effectively, because they can just survive and keep doing a lot of damage to any foe. The Chameleon Stalkers are next, and they do have the main idea that they have 2 volleys with not a lot of range, but with a nice missile strength. This is a precursor weapon, so they'll fire it before they are charging in. They do have poison attacks, decent melee defense, still decent weapon strength, let's say, well, the basic weapon strength. But the main advantage of these guys actually is that they do have some missile resistance and some physical resistance. They also can stalk. They have fire whilst moving, they have Vanguard deployment, they have Strider. It's a tactical advantage. These guys are so tactical, it's really good. Once you learn how to use them, you'll love the unit. Overall, in the late game, you can still field a couple of these units, especially, you know, if you want to use them on the flanks or even on the front line, you know, taking advantage that they are hidden until they fire. So it can be a nasty surprise to enemies, especially with those augmented stats. Now let's start with the bread and butter of the infantry, the Saurus Spears. These are anti-large infantry units with a very nice bonus versus large. Basically, overall, that's the main purpose of them. They don't have a shield, or this version doesn't have a shield. Good melee attack, good melee defense, good armor, good leadership. Overall, this is exactly what you want from them. Late game, you can still field a couple of these units in a pinch. Of course, you may wish the variant with the shields, why not? But even if you need these guys, they'll definitely have enough stats to overcome most foes. Now for a more damage dealer frontline unit, really, that's the Saurus Warriors. Why damage dealer? Well, even though they have like basic melee attack and melee defense, look at that weapon strength. It's just tremendous for what is basically a tier 2 unit. It's really a lot. So definitely you can field these guys anytime. Of course, you may wish to bring the shielded variant. This is the unshielded one. But even in the late game, look at those stats. They just improve it really well. Even the weapon strength. So overall, these guys will definitely do a lot of damage to anything they are fighting against. Now to the variants with shields. Of course, the main idea here is that they have increased melee defense, that bronze shield which helps so much, and these guys of course are the Saurus Spears, so they do have that bonuses as large, charge defense against large foes. That's precisely what you're going to use these guys for, especially in the late game. Don't forget, they'll gain so much more armor, leadership, melee attack and melee defense, and weapon strength. Basically all the important stats are increased, so you can definitely field these guys against anything, and they'll do their work. They'll hold on the flanks against enemy cavalry, for instance. That's precisely their function. And now to a Regiment of Renown, the Legion of Chaqua. Saurus Spears Regiment of Renown with still improved stats, of course, better melee attack and better melee defense. The weapon strength is still anti-large, still a charge defense against large foes, and they do have a nice active ability which gives this effect to allies in range, which is plus 40% missile resistance. These guys are great to actually have in the middle of your force to ensure that no one suffers any damage from missiles, really. And it's really good on any army to use these guys to screen the army before engaging. Really powerful Regiment of Renown. Now to the Saurus Warriors with shields, definitely a very good solid frontline unit, good armor, and they still have that nice shield, which is the main advantage here, so they'll survive much better against enemy missiles. Melee attack and melee defense, they're kinda low, but the weapon strength is humongous for a frontline unit. It's really good. Anything above 50, it's already really cool. Adding to that, of course, late game you can field a lot of these guys because their weakness, which is the melee attack and melee defense gets resolved basically, and they're still very much of a tank. The main advantage of this is that you won't expect them to do a lot of damage, but look at that weapon strength increase. It's really cool. So overall, you can definitely use Saurus warriors with shields if you prefer, or even as a choice, because of course they're quite reliable. Now to one of my favorite units, the Temple Guards. These guys definitely deserve the elite status. Basically why? Because they have armor, they have shield, they have high leadership, they're a very good, solid frontline unit, and they have good melee attack, good melee defense, and armor piercing weapon damage with the bonuses versus large. What else do you need? You can use these guys definitely as a front line, and then let your dinos just do all the necessary damage if you need. Overall in the late game, of course, you can field a lot of units of these guys, because everything that is great gets improved. You know, their armor, their leadership, their melee attack and melee defense reach really good stats over 50, which is always nice. Weapon strength also gets increased a lot, and don't forget it's armor piercing, it's anti-large. So yeah, definitely one of the coolest units to use in any roster, I think, and overall a very good elite unit to have. Now to a Regiment of Renown, which has a very cool look with that kind of frosty weapon. So yeah, that is to signify that they do have magical attacks. So of course these are Temple Guards with just improved stats, still that weapon strength, armor piercing, bonus versus large. A good advantage, a nice advantage here, is that they do have the Guardian ability. So they can increase the physical resistance of lords or heroes, so they're perfect actually to give support, maybe to leave them on the back supporting a caster, lord or hero, that sort of idea, or going in melee with a nice melee hero or lord. Definitely a great unit to use, especially if you remember their main usage. They really are very good supporting a hero or lord. For your first missile unit, the Skink Cohort with Javelins. Basically, they're still shielded, they're basically the same thing as the melee version, but the advantage is their ammunition. They have 3 javelins that you can use, not a lot of range, so these are kind of like skirmishes. The missile strength is not really that powerful, but it does have poison, so that's the main usage, you know, just to, especially in the early game, it's always nice to reduce the enemy stats, so overall that's cool. In the late game, of course, you won't be using too many of these guys, but it's worthy to know that they can become, you know, a very decent, let's say, tier 2 infantry unit if you would wish, even if you just wish to run something thematic, of course. But note those advantages, or that advantage in purple of bringing these guys under a red-crested Skink Chief. Always have that in mind. Now to actually a proper missile unit, the Skink Skirmishers. These precisely, they have that advantage of having vanguard deployment. They can fire whilst moving, which is excellent. That's their main purpose. They do have some much better ammunition, a little bit reduced range, 70 instead of 80 for the other ones. Not a lot of missile strength. They still cause the poison, which is great. So overall, don't put these guys in melee, of course. All their purpose is to use that missile and keep harassing the enemy. Overall, in the late game, you can still field a couple of these units, but never put them into prolonged combat. They won't survive for too long. Really, their main purpose is to keep firing and being annoying to the enemy. And for a much better missile unit, still a skirmishing unit, which is kind of sad for the Lizardmen that they don't have like an archer unit or something like that with a little bit more range. It's one of the weaknesses. But yeah, Chameleon Skinks will help you out in the missile department. Why? They do have poison attacks and poison missile attacks, a much better missile strength here, which is always nice. The advantage of these guys is just how fast they are. They cause poison, so the enemy is reduced. They have vanguard deployment, they have striders, so they have no issues whatsoever with any terrain, which helps, you know, and they have fireless moving, they can stalk. Basically, these guys are such a nasty surprise to enemies. Late game, of course, they just have much better improved stats, both in their melee and their ranged division. This is always nice when it happens, because overall, it just means that you don't have to babysit so much. right? Because they'll do a lot of damage, and even if you miss out a little bit on them, they'll still be able to survive a little bit longer in battle. So it gives you time. It's better to micro, especially in the late game. Now, one advantage here that is always worthy is how resilient they are against missiles, especially in the late game with that possible 65% missile resistance. So yeah, good luck to the enemy of trying to get rid of them. Starting off with the feral cold ones, they are armored, they're armor piercing, that's their main purpose, of course. Overall, not a lot of good melee stats, so keep them charging, that's the main purpose for them. They can get into rampage, which is a problem, because it will hinder with that aspect, which, of course, if you want to cycle charge, the rampage won't help you out, and they do cause fear at least. So overall, the main benefit of these guys is that they're just a cheap armor piercing cavalry unit. And of course, late game, the same thing. They do get a couple of improved stats, but overall that rampage is the big problem. Just ensure that you keep taking them out of rampage whenever applicable. And look, it's a dinosaur riding a dinosaur. So basically, Cold One Riders, that's precisely it. These guys, they still have that armor piercing, they have a little bit better melee attack, and still they do have a shield, which is always nice, it helps them cover. Instead of Rampage, they actually get the Primal Instance, which is cool. If they don't rampage, much better. They still cause fear, which is always nice. Now, in the late game, they do get much better improved stats, reaching the point of kind of like a good melee cavalry. Still very relatively low melee defense. The advantage, of course, is they do cause that armor-piercing weapon strength, which is always nice. They have better charge bonus, so just ensure that you keep charging them, and that's the main purpose of them. The Cold One Spear Riders, well, as you may have guessed it, the main advantage of these guys is that they actually have a bonuses versus large. They're still armor piercing, which is excellent. They still have that primal instance. They still have that cause fear, that shield, good armor. The low melee attack and melee defense, well, that's enhanced late game, which implies that they become just a much better anti-large unit that you can safely have on your flanks against enemy cavalry. Just be aware that they are not exactly the best one at it. They still put the hurt, especially under to lower quality or even medium quality enemy cavalry units, or even assist some dinos on taking out single entities. Now to a regiment of renown, the Hopak cohorts, Cold One Spear Riders regiments. Basically the same unit, just improved stats overall, good melee attack and melee defense in that regard. So they're kind of like a melee cavalry here. Still good charge bonus, so make sure that you use that. Main advantage here is, of course, that they do have immune to psychology, and they have vanguard deployment. So these guys are kind of like a great surprise unit to field. Still really cool to use into a late game army, especially for that. It's always good to have someone with vanguard deployment to get into the enemy backline, artillery, etc. So yeah, overall a very good addition to the roster. Now to a flying cavalry, the Riperdactyl Riders. These guys are very good, really cool. Not a lot of armor, but definitely, of course, the speed is really great because they're flying. Melee attack, it's really awesome. Not a lot of melee defense, so be careful. Once you engage them, they may die really fast with that combination of low armor, low melee defense. Their weapon strength is crazy good, armor piercing bases, and they have a bonus versus infantry and a good charge bonus. Everything here screams that you really should charge these guys in and be careful with them once they are engaged. They have that frenzy, which of course means that they do have that immune to psychology. Overall, just a very good surprise to your enemies. Main advantage here as well is that they actually have vanguard deployment, so you can position these guys really well and then go after the enemy backline while your forces engage. Really powerful. In the late game, you can definitely field some of these guys. They do get more missile resistance, more damage, melee attack, melee defense, overcoming a little bit of that weakness. So yeah, very good unit to have in your forces. And now for a regiment of renown, the Colossedon Hunters. These guys have the main advantage here of being instead an anti-large. So these guys, they can clear the skies for the other Riperdactyl to engage in the infantry, which is awesome. It's always nice to have such a different type of unit with a Regiment of Renown. And as if it wasn't enough, they can get an augment ability to increase even their base and armor piercing weapon damage, which is great. They will go into Rampage, so be careful with this, or just be sure that you have someone next to them to cancel that Rampage out. But overall, a great addition to any army. And now to the Horned Ones. So basically a very powerful cavalry, actually good armor, a bronze shield, which is always nice. They have good melee attack and melee defense. They're kind of like a melee cavalry, rather poor melee defense there, so just be careful a little bit with that. Now their weapon strength is of course armor piercing, really good, really powerful strength. They have a good charge bonus, so charge them in, they'll do a lot of damage, especially in the late game. You can definitely use a couple of these guys for sure, still with that armor piercing in mind, and of course they get better speed, better melee attack, better melee defense, better everything really. So no issue whatsoever bringing some of these guys into the late game. The first of the diners, the Feral Bastiladon. Basically heavily armored, 140 armor, great. Not a lot in terms of melee attack or melee defense. They do have good weapon strength, which is armor piercing, and bonuses versus infantry overall. Note that they do have Rampage. I'm not going to talk about every single one that has Rampage. This does cause terror, even though it's a very low unit, let's say, in low tier unit, it still causes terror, so be mindful of that. Now late game, of course, you're going to field different versions of this, but it's always good to ensure that you have an idea of how good they become. They do get more charge bonus, more weapon strength, melee defense, armor, leadership, as if they needed even more armor, so definitely they're still a great addition to your forces if you need them in a pinch. Now to the Bastiladon Ark of Sotek. Still the same thing as the Bastiladon, same stats, armor, melee attack, melee defense, and weapon strength, of course. The main advantage is that they do have some skinks causing damage with a little bit of range, lots of ammunition, so don't worry about that. The missile strength is really good, so that's cool. It's a Bastiladon that has some range, then they can skirmish all around. In addition, it does have a nice ability, which is the Ark of Sotek. This is a vortex ability. It causes damage over time, which is always nice. So overall, a very good addition to your forces. Note that contrary to the other Bastiladon, it doesn't rampage. The other way around, it actually has primal instance. So be wary of that. In the late game, definitely you can bring a couple of these guys, because they of course get much better stats overall, and they're just a massive tank. So imagine trying to get rid of this. It's really difficult for any enemy. So definitely a really good skirmishing style of tank unit, which is always nice to have. And one of the units that people like to bring in their armies for any army whatsoever, even in outposts, you're gonna get these guys. Why? Because these are Bastiladons with Revivification Crystals. Same thing as the Ark of Sotek ones, because they are Bastiladons, same stats, overall melee attack, melee defense, weapon strength, etc. They still have those skinks causing damage, same poison damage, which is always nice. Advantage is that they have 7 charges of regeneration, and it does resurrect dead combatants, which is excellent. It only can be used on one ally, but of course this ability overall just means like these guys survive a lot because they are a massive tank. You can heal your friends, you can heal a lord, you can heal a hero, or you can heal anyone really, and it's really a nice unit to have in any composition, especially late game, because of course of all the improved stats, even more survival, more damage that they can cause, and of course that healing ability, which is excellent. Now to the Croxigors, your monstrous infantry, really well armored. They don't have a shield, but who cares, they survive. Melee attack and melee defense, really average values, nothing to write home about. Their weapon strength is armor piercing with the bonuses versus infantry, so just charge these guys into an infantry unit, they'll do a lot of damage. Now especially in the late game, of course, look at those improved stats. A noteworthy here is that the green is if you run these guys under the Croxigor Ancient. Note that there's a choice. They don't get all those stats, they just get a couple of them. So you'll realize once you see that, but they're always very useful under those Croxigor Ancients. Even without that, they're very powerful, especially when supported, and especially in the late game, as you can see there from their stats. Now to Feral Stegodon. This guy, just the basis for all Stegodons. Really good armor, armor-piercing weapon strength, and this time he does have a lot of weapon strength, which is always nice. Bonuses versus infantry. Do note that the biggest problem with this guy is that although he has a charge bonus, and it would seem that he's best used as a cycle charging monster, he does have rampage, so be careful with that. He may go into rampage and just be in a bad matchup, so be aware of that problem. In addition, he of course causes terror. In the late game, you can still field a couple of these guys if you don't have the resources to field better versions, of course, but overall the main purpose is that you can see what types of stats are increased for all Stegodons here, and then of course you'll see the next versions of them, but still a very good unit to have in any roster. Now to a better version of the Crocsigors, the Sacred Crocsigors. These guys still armored, still armor-piercing damage with a little bit more weapon strength. They lose the bonus versus infantry for a little bit more damage overall. They do cause magical attacks, which is their main purpose. They are really good against anything that has a physical resistance, of course. Overall, a very good version of, or better enhanced version of the Crocsigors, especially in the late game. You can definitely field a lot of these guys. Like stated, those are the stats, in green, those are the stats with under an ancient Crocsigor, which is always nice, really cool to have, and overall a very good frontline breaker. That's the sort of idea for these guys. Now to a Regiment of Renown unit, the Cohort of Huatl, the Sacred Crocsigor ROR. Besides having amazing stylistic choices for their weapons, really, they have good armor, of course, as always, better enhanced stats. Look at that melee attack and melee defense, of course. Still magical attack, still the armor-piercing weapon strength, which is always nice. Main advantages here. They have the dazed effect. Whoever they hit gets less melee defense and less speed, so good luck running away from them. And as if it wasn't enough, they do get perfect vigor. So overall, a very nice, niche, useful cohort, Sacred Crocsigor, actually ROR. It's really cool to have these guys in together with other, of course, Sacred Crocsigors. Now to the Feral Carnosaur, basically an anti-large monster. That's their purpose. They have Frenzy, which is really cool. That damage is a really powerful weapon, armor-piercing damage with the nice bonuses as large. That's the main case. Still not to be neglected, it's their speed. 75, really powerful unit. They cause terror, which is always excellent. Note that the biggest issue is that they do go into rampage, so be sure that you have a lord or hero that can take them out of it, just so that they can survive that and run away, of course, from a bad matchup. Overall, in the late game, you can definitely field these guys, especially to go after enemy lords or heroes. It's a very good sniper unit to use, but they can engage against nearly anything, especially with those enhanced stats. Overall, in the end, look at that melee attack, melee defense. So it's really cool that these guys can be rather versatile in the late game. And now for Regiment of Renown, Geltbloom's Terror. I think that's how you say it. Feral Carnosaur Regiment of Renown. This one has still the armor-piercing anti-large, but the advantage is that it has Vanguard deployment and Striders. So overall, a very good unit to surprise your foe, get him in the back, destroy that caster lord of theirs. It's really a good idea to have these guys, especially with other stalking units or Vanguard deployed units. Really cool. And overall, that's the main purpose, a surprise dinosaur. Can you imagine that? Now to a very cool unit, the Kotal. He's a spellcaster, and he's still very good in melee, really good armor, melee attack, melee defense with magical attacks and a nice weapon strength, which is also armor piercing. Overall, already that would be a cool unit to have in the skies and that will jump in. But the best thing is that they have an aura, and this aura gives stalk to your allies in the ground, which is great just to have so many combinations that you can have with this guy to surprise the enemy, which is always nice when you can pull off those sort of tactical ideas. Now, in addition to that, it also has some charges of Lesser Chain Lightning and Iranian Thunderbolt, 2 bombardment, 1 bombardment, and actually a vortex spell, which is always nice, very useful, very cool. And in addition, in the late game, of course, it does get a lot of good benefits from Redline skills, research, and XP, of course, mainly to become a little bit better in melee. So after you use those spells and after the surprise effect from that aura is gone, they can still go in melee and do some damage. Now to a regiment of renown, the Spirit of Tepok. Basically the same thing as a Kodal, however, we know in terms of stats, armor, good speed, of course melee attack and melee defense very well enhanced because of that extra from XP, still armor piercing weapon strength. The main advantage, of course, it still has that stalk ability, which is always nice. It has a ward save, which is always cool, and it has different spells. This one has the Barona's Time Warp, giving allies speed and a melee attack bonus, which is always cool, and it has Earth Blood. So by having Earth Blood, of course, you can imagine how cool this unit is to use in any army whatsoever, really, because of just that regeneration. That's the main purpose, and it's still good in melee, it's still good to use in that surprise factor. So overall, very nice Regiment of Renown for many tactical choices, and it's beautiful. I mean, look at that. Now to the Ancient Stegodon Engine of the Gods. Basically this is called a support monster, even though it's really powerful in melee, with good armor, good speed, melee attack and melee defense, not that important when you have so much weapon strength, and the bonuses versus infantry. And you still have a lot of ammunition with good range of a nice missile strength. So overall this would be already cool. So what is the advantage of these guys? Well, first they have a damage resistance, a ward save, only 5%, but it's always nice because it's in an area, of course, and as if it wasn't enough, it does have the Burning Alignment. These are 2 charges of a wind spell that causes quite a lot of damage, mostly armor piercing, actually 100% armor piercing, so it's great, and overall that's the main benefit. In the end, in the late game, you can bring a lot of these guys, even just for their melee capabilities, because of their increased stats. They increase also their charge, their missile strength, armor, leadership, melee attack, and melee defense, making them quite enough of a tank and a single entity, let alone the abilities. So always a very good unit to bring. Now, as if it wasn't enough, the dinosaurs keep increasing to the point that they become a colossal feral dread saurian. Basically, look at the amount of hit points, almost 15k. Good armor, good melee attack, poor melee defense, so if he gets surrounded it can be a trouble for them. They do have so much mass that he can push through anything, really. Weapon strength is massive with a lot of armor piercing. Still nice charge bonus, so you definitely should charge this guy in. Do note that he is still prone to rampage, so be careful with that. Just ensure that you have some hero or lord nearby to take him out of it. He has that cause terror, of course, who wouldn't be terrorized, but this guy has a nice necklace there, which is always nice. In the late game, of course, you can field a couple of these guys, and especially their leadership improves, melee attack as well, so 77, they won't miss. It's bad that the melee defense doesn't increase too much, or their speed, for instance. That would be nice to use them more like a chariot unit, perhaps, but still, very good upgrades, definitely reinforcing the idea of using these guys late game. And if we want a different version of the Dread Saurian, well, you can bring the Dread Saurian, which is actually the same idea, but they have ranged attack. And it's quite a nice missile strength, really. A note that is divided across all the 8 skinks that are on top of him. Yeah, there's 8. And the biggest advantage that I see about these guys is that they no longer have the rampage. They have the passive ability of the primal instance, which is really cool. So overall, a much better version of the unit, and definitely really good to field in the late game, as you can see on those stats above. Nothing changing in terms of the missile overall. Do note, I didn't mention that they cause poison, which is always nice. Whoever they're fighting, it's gonna have a little bit reduced stats overall. So yeah, definitely field a couple of these guys. They'll get rid of nearly anything. And if you want the ultimate dinosaur, the Shredder of Lustria, Regiment of Renown of the Dread Saurian, as if it wasn't enough. So basically the idea behind this guy, of course, similar stats, just improved ones in terms of melee attack, melee defense, which is great. He still has those skinks doing a lot of missile strength damage, and overall the main advantage here is that he has a dread aversion, a passive ability that affects the enemies in range, giving them even less leadership, -8 leadership. So overall a very cool unit to bring, to add to a couple more Dread Saurians, and just so that you can have a really nice dino army. Yeah, overall a very powerful, strong monster to put against nearly anything. The Pterodon Riders, a flying missile cavalry, they do have a good, decent range, let's say. Decent armor-piercing missile damage here. It's not majorly armor-piercing, but it's still good. And they have poison attacks, which is always nice. They don't have a lot of melee stats, so keep them away from melee. They do have an ability, which is the dropped rocks. They can do a lot of damage, just one use of these, but still really powerful. Once you engage with a little bit of missiles, of course, you can drop the rocks, and of course it will do a lot of damage to them. Late game, you can definitely bring a couple of these guys along in your army, especially for that drop rocks ability, and of course keeping the skirmishing on. And the Regiment of Renown, the Pahawks Sentinels, Pterodon Riders Regiment. Basically, similar stats. They do have quite an improved melee attack and melee defense, but still nothing to go into melee, really. Just avoid that. They can do it as a last resource, really. Main idea is still that they have that missile attack, and it still causes poison damage, but in addition they do have a nice physical resistance and missile resistance, and they have a different dropped rocks. They have dropped rocks of Sundering. They call Sundered Armor, which reduces the enemy armor, making them perfect to have with other Pterodon Riders. Now we have the Pterodon Riders with Fire Leech Bolas, similar to the other Pterodon Riders in every aspect except that they do have flaming attacks. So that makes them much better against infantry. That's why they're classed as anti-infantry, even though they don't have bonuses versus infantry here. Now in addition to that, of course, they still have that dropped rocks. In the late game, you can definitely bring a couple of these guys in some of your armies, especially that drop rocks ability is really cool and really useful. And if the enemy especially lacks anti-flying capabilities, so if they don't have too many missiles, if they don't have flyers of their own, of course they're going to struggle to keep these guys from doing some damage, which is always perfect. That's mainly the idea that I bring them in. The Lizardmen Hunting Pack, monstrous missile beasts. These guys, the main advantage is that they do have armor-piercing missiles, which is always nice to have a unit that can do that damage, and they actually look really cool and awesome. Now, they do have some good armor-piercing and nice weapon strength, but of course, you should avoid combat with them whenever necessary. Treat them like archers that they have armor-piercing, of course. In the late game, they do get some improved stats, but not a lot in terms of their missiles, which is a shame. Wish they would get, some more ammunition, maybe some more range, because they do lack it. Still, of course, you can still bring a couple of these guys, especially for the anti-armor capabilities, which is always nice. Now to a Regiment of Renown, the Amaxon Barbs, Lizardmen Hunting Pack Regiment. So basically, all the same stats than the others, a little bit more missile strength, and the main advantage is that they do cause poison. So these guys are definitely a good unit to have in nearly any army, just because of their debuff, and of course they do have that missile strength, that armor-piercing missile strength with the poison, really powerful unit. In addition to that, they also have a little bit more missile resistance, so of course enemy missiles will still struggle to defeat them, especially because they do have armor, so you would need some armor-piercing missiles to even damage these beasts. Overall, a very good ROR unit. Now to the Salamander Hunting Pack. These are still very powerful missile beasts. The advantage here is that they do have that flaming attack and also an anti-large missile strength. So basically that modus versus large means that these guys are very powerful, especially to use in flanks with someone to screen them, so that they can dish out the hurt against any large targets. If the enemy closes up, they still have somewhat of a good advantage with the weapon strength being armor piercing as well, and they do have enough armor to survive a little bit, but low melee attack, low melee defense, don't count on them defeating anything or being a frontline or anything like that. In the late game, of course, as you can see on the stats over there, they do get some nice melee defense and even more leadership, so they won't rout as easily. They get a little bit more speed. Main advantage is that their missile strength also increases. So overall, they're still a missile unit in essence, and that's how you should use it. Most likely what I do is to put them on the flanks so that they can put the hurt on any enemy cavalry, provided of course that you have someone to screen them. Now to a regiment of renown, the Umbral Tide Salamander Hunting Pack. So basically these are just a much better version, and the advantage is that they do have that stalk ability and perfect vigor. So they're really powerful at springing some ambushes, especially against large targets, because they do still have that anti-large missile strength. So perfect for that, and with the increased stats they can do somewhat good in melee as well. So yeah, definitely some unit that you can use to follow on your flanks against an enemy that is not prepared for this, and it's perfect because of that anti-large. Typically the flank units will be some large targets, so yeah, very decent ROR unit overall. The Ancient Salamander, it's kind of like an upgrade from that Salamander pack, of course. Much better improved stats, a really powerful armor-piercing weapon strength, still poor in terms of melee attack and melee defense. Nice in armor, of course, and hit points. Now, the advantage is, of course, it does have those flaming attacks, both in missile and both in melee. Decent range, actually, which is kind of nice, because that's something you're lacking. And the missile strength, of course, very powerful armor-piercing. It's not anti-large as the other salamanders, but it does have the flammable, so this is the main use to cause that weakness to fire damage. And of course you can use this with other salamander packs to enforce that extra damage onto the enemy. Overall, in the end, to the late game, you can actually bring a couple of these guys. Definitely they have much better melee attack and melee defense values than the typical salamander pack, but of course that's not their intended use. What their intention is to be a very good missile single entity, and of course it has its uses. So yeah, definitely a good unit in the roster overall. Now to another Bastiladon, this time the Solar Engine. So basically same stats in melee as other Bastiladons, but with magical and flaming attacks in terms of their missiles. Great range, especially for finally some range for the Lizardmen. Now the missile strength is really powerful, and it's not majorly armor piercing. That's something to be noted. What it does cause is the blinded effect, which is really cool. Reducing the melee defense and melee attack and accuracy. This is great actually to focus down single entities so that they are really diminished in their efficiency, and of course your own single entities can dish out the damage. So very powerful unit to bring, especially in the late game. They do get their enhanced stats, even more survival with that leadership, with that melee defense, which is perfect, and still with some improved weapon missile strength, which is always nice. Now to your actually artillery unit. This is the Stegodon. It's just a single entity. It does have enough range to classify as an actual artillery, which is nice. Same stats in melee as other Stegodons, of course. Powerful weapon strength, armor piercing, bonuses as infantry. That's cool. But the main advantage is that missile strength is actually armor piercing, and it has that enhanced range. And it still causes poison, which is excellent. So overall, that's the main idea behind these guys. Of course, sometimes people forget that they're not just an artillery, they're a monstrous artillery, because good luck to the enemy trying to snipe one of these. They'll have a hard time really against it, especially in the late game with those increased stats, more leadership, more melee attack, melee defense, and weapon strength. You can use him definitely just charging in and taking advantage of the few shots that you get before reaching the melee. So it's really a powerful unit in any occasion. Now to the Feral Troglodon. In essence, a very good, powerful unit. It has good armor, good melee attack and melee defense values. The weapon strength is armor piercing, but that's not the main idea here. The main idea is that it does have a ranged attack, not a lot of range, which is a problem, but look at that missile strength. It's really powerful, armor piercing with a really amazing bonuses as large as 150, so that's the main target. The main issue about this guy is that it does go into rampage, so be careful, be on the lookout for that issue. It will have to approach the enemy in order to use that missile strength, that missile attack, and then it can go into rampage very easily if the enemy manages to attack it. So yeah, in the late game you can definitely bring a couple of these guys to deal with enemy large entities. They'll be able to even survive in prolonged melee, because they do get quite an enhancement in their melee attack, melee defense, armor, everything that is really important there. So they become more like a melee monster that actually has a nice ranged attack. So really perfect unit to bring to your flanks, or even just to defeat some enemy lords. You know, focus firing them. That's really a great addition to the roster. Now to a very cool Regiment of Renown, the Pale Death. Also loved the name as well. Improved stats, of course, as any Regiment of Renown, because it has that 9 chevron unit rank. Still very powerful melee attack, melee defense, and weapon strength. So you can use this guy in melee, definitely. Weak part is actually the hit points. That's why it's not as powerful as it may seem. It doesn't have a lot of hit points, so be careful with that. Now, in terms of the range, it's still a very powerful missile strength. That's excellent. Armor piercing, the anti-large, and it causes poison, which is always nice. It still can go into rampage. Be careful. It's still feral. Troglodyte, it can go into rampage. It does cause terror. Most of these single entities cause terror. I've been forgetting to mention it. The purpose here is this interesting ability. This recharges when in melee, Primeval Roar, and you can affect allies in range in an area, giving them more melee attack. So it's perfect to have him engage in melee. It will recharge, and as soon as you can activate this, you just fall back, activated it. Your forces will have a lot more melee attack, and of course you can still benefit from that ranged attack. Overall, a very powerful Regiment of Renown for you. The Ancient Stegodon, it would appear to be a upgrade from the other Stegodon, but it ceases to be an artillery. It only has 115 range. It still has very good stats, very powerful weapon strength, which is mainly armor piercing. It has a bonus versus infantry, so it's perfect to go into the enemy lines and wreak havoc. Very powerful charge bonus, so keep him charging. Not a lot of ammunition, but it does have a lot of missile strength. So in essence, this is just an added bonus, so adding to that weapon strength, the skinks over there on top of the Ancient Stegodon would do a lot of damage, which is perfect. That's exactly what you want. Just engage into the front line, charge him around as a chariot, especially in the late game when you get all those advanced stats and upgrades. So his leadership improves really. It's very important because of course the unit won't rout as easily, so you can keep him in fight, but also the charge bonus, the weapon strength, everything that you would like to have increases, so it becomes a very powerful smashing unit. It will smash the front lines. If you bring like 3 of these against the enemy front lines, I don't care what they have there, they're gonna be in real trouble. Now to a very cool Regiment of Renown, the Thunderous one. And Thunderous it is. It's an Ancient Stegodon, so similar stats, just upgraded with the XP, of course. A very good missile strength still, which is always nice. This guy will go and smash into the enemy front lines, do a lot of damage, disrupt the enemy, which is perfect. And it has a very interesting ability, which is the Judgment of the Uxmak. This is a passive ability with 10 charges, so pretty much it will last the whole battle, really. And enemies are hit by lightning strikes when in melee combat, so it will recharge when engaged in melee, so he's electrifying. That's the sort of idea. It's like having Thor in the shape of an Ancient Stegodon there. So it's really a powerful unit to bring in any army composition, and one that you'll find really fun to use and to see in battle. So overall, very powerful unit to bring for your forces. And there you go, all the units from the Lizardmen roster, before, after research, XP and Redline skills. So I hope this helps you get a couple more compositions or different army compositions for you to use in your own gameplays. That's the sole purpose of this, to give you a little bit more options to customize your own campaigns and to enjoy this game. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye bye.